Today is Saturday, May the 1st, and I'm coming to you today with today's devotional. Our scripture reading is the last chapter of Numbers chapter 36, and an introductory chapter, Deuteronomy chapter 1, to our new study in Deuteronomy. Now, the title of this devotional is Only a Nation of Fools Eradicates Its History. Allow me to first finish Numbers 36. Now, Numbers 36 I'm titling Women's Rights and a Question of Inheritance. Now, we have noticed in an earlier study the problem that arose when a man died without a son as his heir, Numbers 27. Well, that Hebrew man's name was Zelophehad, and he had died without a son, but he had 5 daughters who had petitioned that they were their father's heirs and rightful heirs of his possession in the promised land. Well, the Lord had directed Moses that Zelophehad's daughters would be given their father's inheritance. Well, because the lands were assigned by tribes and families, there was a concern among tribal leaders what would become of a man's inheritance should his daughters marry men outside their tribe. Now, it was contended by those leaders that the lands would be lost to another tribe should the daughters of Zelophehad marry outside the tribe. And the quandary was finally resolved by the daughters being required to take a husband from their father's tribe, that is, marry one of their distant cousins, and thereby keeping the land within the tribe. Now, Numbers 36 concludes with the daughters of Zelophehad submitting to the Lord's will, marrying men within their tribe, and thus the land was secured for that tribe for all future generations. Now that brings us to an introduction to the book of Deuteronomy. Our chronological study of the scriptures brings us to the 5th book of the first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Pentateuch. Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, of course, Genesis, but Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers chronicled Israel's journey in the wilderness and gave us a record of God's law and commandments. Now, the book of Deuteronomy begins at the conclusion of Israel's wanderings, with that nation encamped at the very threshold of the promised land. Now, with the exception of Moses, Joshua, and Caleb, the generation that had departed Egypt 40 years earlier, all of whom were 20 years or older, had all died in the wilderness. And so Deuteronomy is an important chapter. It is really begins the final address, the final speech of Moses to the young generation that will need to conquer Canaan, the promised land. And so we have the final words of Moses, his exhortation after shepherding Israel for 40 years. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 3, "And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel, according unto all that the Lord had given him in commandment unto them." Well, what was it of which Moses was speaking? Well, it was important for Moses to rehearse with that generation who they were, from whence they came, and God's plan for the nation. Now, Moses challenged the people in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 8, "Behold, I've set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give unto them, unto Israel, and to their seed after them." Such much as a man might rehearse his ancestral family tree to know the history of his lineage, Moses sought to pass to this new generation a knowledge of not only their physical ancestry, but more importantly, their spiritual heritage as God's chosen people. Now, the balance of the first chapter in Deuteronomy is so important because it is a recap of Israel's 40 years in the wilderness and the previous generation's refusal to trust the Lord. For any in Israel who might question why Why did their parents and their grandparents, why did they perish in the wilderness? Moses reminded the nation of their history. Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 32. Yet in this thing ye did not, speaking of the children of Israel and of their parents before them, ye did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you to search out a place to pitch your tents in fire by night he protected you, to show you by the way ye should go, with a cloud by day. And we read in Deuteronomy 1 and verse 32, surely there shall not one of these men of this earlier generation, this evil generation, this generation that chose not to trust God, surely there would not be one of those men that would see that good land. The exception, verse 36, would be Caleb. Verse 38 would be Joshua. But Moses even says of himself in verse 37 of Deuteronomy 1, and the Lord was angry with me for your sake, saying, thou shalt not go in thither. You know, I want to close with this thought for you today. History is important, and only a doomed society dare deny its history and fail to learn from its past. Understand this: eradicating the history and the symbols of the monuments of a nation, it might pacify a few, but it will invariably destine its people to repeat its failures. In the words of the British statesman Winston Churchill, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In these United States, we have been watching in these past several years where monuments of our history's past have been torn down, demolished, eradicated from our culture entirely. How foolish we are! For we should see those symbols not only as a challenge, but as a reminder of our past. May we learn from history past, knowing if we do not, we will invariably repeat the failures. God bless you, my friend. I hope that you'll join me this Sunday morning at Hillsdale Baptist Church on hillsdalebaptist.org as we continue our study in the book of 2 Timothy at 10:30 Eastern Daylight Time. God bless. Have a great day, and bye-bye.